Bible is just about as wrong as it is possible for any document to be.
For fuck's sake!
They want to go ahead and they want to take this idea and talk about that as if it's real, as if that's what's real.
This is insane. Look at this vastness.
Fuck!
Veto!
Fuck! Okay, I'll start again. Hello, and, welcome to this June 2nd, 2013, and tonight we have a very interesting show. We have Realistic Nihilist, Cheeky Vomito, Inspiring Philosophy, Johann Ratz, and James Stillwell to talk about Does Free Will Exist? And, let's begin. So, Cheeky, since you've been studying this a lot recently, what do you want to say first?
That's a broad question. One thing I'd like to say is that I'll be interested to hear how... can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. How's this sound? Okay, good. I'll be interested to hear how indeterminism gets you free will. So I'm not a physicist or anything. So I'll be interested to hear how you can make it conceptually coherent. Because in indeterminism, there's still a gap between indeterminism and free will. Indeterminism being the idea that there is randomness.
Anybody want to respond to that?
Yeah, so basically I would say that indeterminism by itself doesn't give us free will, right? And it could just be some non-conscious force causing the free action, or causing the indeterminate actions, but it does open up a window for the possibility of free will. And then further from that, you can argue from, say, the Conway-Coken theorem, for example, which shows that the particle's behavior is dependent on the choice of the observer, or the experimenter. And then from that point, you can make a further argument from free will.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what we should first start doing is actually define what we're talking about, because the question of free will, there's a lot of philosophical debate about what that means, and there's also a lot of confusion about what that means. Like, I've heard many people say or argue that if they can just restrict freedom, they can show that we do not have free will. So, and that's not necessarily what free will would mean. So if I say I have free will, it would be completely different if I say I have freedom. And free will would be the ability to would be the ability for a rational agent to choose a choice from among various alternatives. Now that would coincide with if we have freedom. They would be related to one another, but it's really not the same thing. So again, if I could say I have free will, it's not the same thing for me to say that I have freedom.
I think it's a really conflated term to say it's free will. Why not just call it restricted will? And there is no conflation.
Well, that's yeah.
Oh, you have a useful term in your video, maximal autonomy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's Plantinga's term.
Yeah, one question I would have is that sort of minimal autonomy, say you have like an open future. Now, is there somewhere in between which is sufficient autonomy? Because that seems to be what you're after in your video.
Well, this is what I was just trying to get into a little bit. When Plantinga talks about maximal autonomy, he talks about having absolute freedom regardless with unbelievable amounts of anything you could possibly think of. That's not what we mean when we say we have free will. My amount of freedom will vary throughout my life. It will, and then regardless of how much freedom I have, it will limit my availability for my free will, but they're not the same thing. So if I could use an analogy, for example, particularly like a car would be, you can restrict how far you can go in a car by the amount of gasoline you have it. So likewise, you can restrict my availability for my free will by the amount of freedom I have. So, for example, you could lock me in a cell. That's going to limit my availability to use my free will. You could tie me up. That would limit my ability to use my free will because I have restricted my freedom. But that's not to say that I don't have free will. Free will would be the ability to make conscious decisions within one's environment. Now, no one would argue you cannot restrict my freedom, but the ability to take away my free will would be something completely different.
So, I really despise the term free will because it's loaded down with a lot of baggage. There's a lot of different conceptions and definitions of free wills that people are arguing for, and I don't know if I would call my concept of the will free. I guess that would really depend because, we're all products of our environment to some extent, and you just used the word conscious, being aware, but we're only aware according to our environment. So a lot of our tastes are formed by marketing executives, for instance. We're told what to like and what not to like, what will make us an individual and different things. So we're only free in the context, in a certain context, I would say. So I'm not sure how saying free will is really useful, because what are we talking about here? What do we mean by free will? What do we mean by...
I would agree, yeah, there are various things in our environment that are going to affect our decision-making, and libertarians would never deny that. And influences, desires, belief, they're going to have influence over our choices. But the libertarian says, ultimately, we are going to pick from various choices from within our desires, within surrounding influences, and make a decision from that. It would be another stretch to say that those are actually causing our decisions. So this is why we can speak of counterfactuals. You draw from different influences, different desires, to have made a different choice than have made the choice drawing from the influence and desires. See, free will advocates are not going to say we're free to pick those desires. It says within these desires and within these various influences, we're able to pick and select from them and make a conscious decision. This is why Ayn Rand uses the term focusing. We're able to focus and pick from various things to make a decision.
I have a question, actually, because isn't this distinction between the I and these desires that are, couldn't we say these desires and these things are us instead of them being separate from us?
I suppose you could say that in part. I don't know if IP would agree per se, but
no, I would agree. I would agree.
Okay, yeah, part of us. Yeah,
they're not driving us.
What do you mean they don't drive us? What motivates you? Feelings, right?
Johanna, did you answer this one, or do you want me to respond?
I was going to say, well, I may kind of define free will in kind of a weird way, somewhat between compatibilism and libertarianism, right? So basically my view is that it's free in the sense that the mind is what caused it. Now maybe the mind has its own nature and it can only cause it that one way from its own context, but we could never predict that from the get-go because in a sense the mind is a prime causer in a sense, right?
Yeah, that's what libertarian philosophy would say. They would not deny that we don't have desires or influences, but in the end, the final cause is us. We're not an effective cause, or what's the term I'm thinking of? It's an efficient cause. I said effective. I meant to say efficient cause. We're not the efficient cause. That we would be considered the final cause.
Right. That's what. That's how I would define free will ultimately.
You're talking about some sort of control over your ambivalence. That's what it sounds like to me. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's exactly what it sounds like. You're saying you're going to have conflicting desires, but at that point, some sort of existential you decides which desires to go along with. And to me, that makes no sense because
Then you have an infinite regress, right?
right, the desire to pick something would be your most prominent desire. So you are subject to your desires under that circumstance. You're saying that at anything, even if you're ambivalent, you come to a point where you're at 50-50 and then you need to think about it for a while. Eventually, even upon your ponderances, you're going to go with the situation that you find most desirable. So it's more intelligible to say your desires drive you rather than you decide what desires to choose from.
It's not like your desires are like a menu, I guess.
But even even if they are strife, just like a menu, you're not going to say there's 1,000 choices right in front of you. You're going to pick the choice that you desire most. So your desire is prominent.
Well, once again, I would kind of go into that. If we're going to look back at Aristotle, is that would make sense if we were instinctive animals. The difference between man and animals is not that I feel hungry. It's I can have second-order reasoning. I don't want to feel hungry. So we don't always go with what our desires are because we can reason, we can be rational animals and decide against that. And this is why even determinists admit that we have this sense of free will, that we're able to be rational animals. So if I'm going to cite Greg D. Caruso in his book Free Will and Conscious, he openly admits in the first section of his book, we all subjectively feel that it's ultimately up to us what we choose and how we act, and that we could have chosen or acted otherwise. And so what he's saying is that we ultimately feel in this intuitive sense that we are able to decide if we want to go with what we desire strongly, or we can go with something that we may think we don't really desire that much, but it might be better down the road, or maybe it won't be, or there's this rational process going on in the mind allowing us to decide, and we're not just going with what we instinctively desire most. So from there, I would just like to say that since we have this sense, I really need to see a connection to where those desires are actually physically causing such things to happen.
Well, certainly there are normative. Certainly there are normative desires that animals and then non-human animals would have, or like ants would have. According to their nature, their constitution, they're going to have things that they normally desire. And of course, all of this is contingent upon your upbringing. Talking about swinging over to human beings now. So, since if you're brought up in a Christian home, you're going to start off with a Christian belief system and a Christian worldview, and perhaps there's all kinds of Christian tendencies. And then the more you get outside of that environment, and the more information you have, the more you can make a conscious decision. And then we swing over to each person creates their own telos, and then makes everyday decisions and short-term goals based on their long-term goals. But those goals, those teloses, are a product of being a human in the first place. They're a product of being a specific type of being. So I'm not understanding what it is we're supposed to be free from. We're not arguing, I'm sure you're not arguing for a random will, right? There is some coherency. You're not just like, 1 minute I want crack, the next minute I want to help an old lady across the street. Oh wait, no, I want salad. No, that's when we bring in indeterminacy, that's what I feel like is being argued for, whether the person knows it or not. It doesn't seem like there's any governing nature that governs the will, which the will happens to be an expression of.
I guess what I would say is that it's indeterminate from the position of, if you were trying to set up scientific laws to predict it, you could only go so far, and you get say the uncertainty principle or something. But basically, the will is the governing force, but it's a prime force, and you can't predict it. Instead of it being a cause that you can, or an effect that you can predict from a cause, it's the first cause.
Yeah, this is what we saw in the John Bell experiment in 1964, that we can speak of counterfactual definiteness of our actions, and the only way out of it is really to posit superdeterminism.
Kiki, you have anything to say? Oh, go ahead, Rose.
I'd like to address your point that I feel no one else addressed. I feel like what you're talking about, having the ability, you made this distinction between instinct and like the power of thought, I suppose, is what you would call it. But to me, this is sort of a false dichotomy, because you are still following your desires. You're just not following your urges. I feel like there's an important desire is something that you want. Now, this is what I was talking about, ambivalence. Say you have conflicting emotions right now. Say you feel like you should think about some action before you do it. That's a feeling. You feel this action, or you feel like you desire to think about it before you're placing your desire to rationalize over your desire to eat or something in that instance. Some other conflicting emotion, but your desire is still driving you in that circumstance, is what I'm saying. I feel like it's a false dichotomy to say, oh, it's no longer desire if it's not an immediate physical urge.
Right, and I wanted to add, Nietzsche would say that each person is a compound of wills, if you will, a hierarchy of wills, and whichever, is the stronger, of course, wins out. So there is a will to power, and each person, to Nietzsche, the will was not free, and it was not unfree. He rejected both indeterminacy and determinacy. So a lot of this is quite, I think, ambiguous. This is why I hate talking, or I should say using the term free will, because obviously our wills are determined, and obviously there are conflicting wills. I want something, but I don't have the money to buy it, and I don't want to be a criminal, and I don't want to go to jail, so I'm not going to steal it. So there is a hierarchy of wills just in that. My desire not to go to jail outweighs my desire for the brand new iPad 5 or some shit.
Thank you for illustrating my point.
Would you say wants are actually desires?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, I would say so. Sure.
Like
Yeah.
like how in economics your wants and needs, you need something, or you want it. I guess you could say I desire this more, even though when I think of it, I require this to live.
Well, needs don't really exist in the sense that a lot of people think, because you don't need to live.
Right.
That's a want. That's a goal. So need is really kind of a term that I don't like to use.
I meant as in like food and stuff. I didn't mean.
It's a stipulative term, Strife. It's a stipulative term. Like, under stipulations, you need things. If, say, you're eating a lot and you're gaining weight or something and you don't want to gain weight, then what you need to do is not eat. But if you don't give a shit, then you don't need to do anything.
Right.
That's the same way with what he's talking about. When he talks about needs, they're talking about needs for your body to maintain function, usually in economics. Like water. Like, you need water.
Yeah, like that.
It's very stipulative. Desires are more are less specific than needs.
Yeah, but going about that, I'd like to say that what you're saying, though, is you're saying that ultimately the strongest desire wins. Is that what you're saying, realistic?
Yes.
So ultimately we have these various desires, and then the strongest one will win. Well, my question would be is, how do we know what the strongest one is? Is it always one we go with? And the reason why I ask is because in the sense of how we think, we don't look at life as if, like, we're just going with the one choice. This is why in the free will determinist debate, the determinist sides even admit that we do sense that we somehow could have chosen something else, that we have this counterfactual definiteness of these other paths we could have picked, I guess you could say, or these other choices we could have made. So when you say that the desire has caused it, I mean, I don't really see a direct link. I just see that as we have reasons for the actions we took, and I could say I took other reasons. I mean, I guess you could say that those desires cause my choices, but I don't see the direct link. I don't see the actual cause to make me think that that is actually what caused me to do that. All I see is that there were these various reasons, and I picked the one that I thought was the best one. Now, I don't see that as actually forcing me. I'm using a sense of rationality to look at these various desires, and then I'm picking the one that I feel would be the best choice for my life. I don't necessarily see that as being the determining driving process.
But what's rational is determined by desire, first of all. You say you look at these irrational set, but what is rational? I mean, you have to decide what rational is, because it all depends on the goal you're trying to meet. It's heavily dependent on whatever goal you're trying to meet. So if you're trying to meet a specific goal, there's only a rational set of circumstances that you can take to achieve that. So but your desire is telling you what your goal is. You have the goal. You can't rationally determine what a goal is. There is no rational goals.
Right. 'Tis not contrary to prefer the destruction of the whole world to the scratching of my finger. 'Tis not contrary to reason, but merely unusual. So, Hume was showing here that telos, that these goals, these desires, these wants, whatever you want to call them, these wills, have nothing to do with logic. Logic is simply a means to an ends.
Right.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to hit at, though, is if that's the case, well, then we're just positing superdeterminism. We're saying that all these choices have already been determined, and I really don't see any evidence for that, and that's what John Bell was saying in his experiment after that.
I would like to jump in here for a second.
Wait,
You're
wait,
using
can I just clarify, Dutch? Dutch, to you guys, does free will actually, deal with theism? Does it have to deal with theism?
No, there are many atheists like Walter Rowe, who were libertarians.
Yeah, because Dutch think that defending theism, they think you two are defending theism. He thinks that.
Well, I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. I mean, I've read several atheists who believe in free will. Walter Rowe, Ayn Rand.
Dennett, for example.
Dennett would be a compatible list, but yeah, he would technically hold to some sort of free will.
I mean, compatibilism they still do believe in free will. I mean, same with Shelley Kagan, for example, who's a Yale professor of philosophy, very prominent.
Yeah, but we would define it completely differently. We would say that they can't. Libertarians would say they really can't be. Determinism and free will really can't be compatible.
Well, it's still a different thing. I mean, the only point I wanted to make just for a second is that you're using a lot of terms from quantum mechanics that really don't you're using them in a sense that they don't really work. And it's kind of reminding me of when Leonard Mlodinow, if you've ever seen this clip on YouTube, confronted Deepak Chopra about using that kind of stuff. And I just want to jump on that, because when you use a term like superdeterminism or counterfactual definiteness, that's a very specific measurement and term that has nothing to do with talking about free will. It's about physical experimentation.
Well, superdeterminism, I mean, John Bell said that would have to hold to that we actually, all of the choices in the mind were actually determined.
Well, here's where it comes into actual free will, Stam. The whole point with the Conway-Colkin theorem, they call it the free will theorem, and they're pointing out with the quantum eraser, whether or not you pull the blinds in the back up determines whether or not the particle was a wave or a particle, right? But the point is that in that case you have real free will if it exists of the experimenter, right? He can either choose to pull the slit up or leave the blinds up, or leave them down, right? And so then, based on that choice, theoretically the particle or the state will have left the slits, back at the pre. There would be some connection to how this quantum particle acts based on the free will of the experimenter to pull the slits up and down.
Well, the issue here is that we're talking about a person who's being observed rather than the phenomenon itself. Wouldn't you agree?
Say that again?
We're constrained by the fact that we are outside observers in this phenomenon, not actually the phenomenon itself. It's like for me to say, it's okay, I can run, and I've written circuit simulations on my own computer with code where I can simulate what's going on when you're writing an arithmetic logical unit that shifts bits left and right so that you get numbers on a computer screen, right? I can do that, but that's a simulation, and that's affected by and I can even simulate to a quantum level, but it's a simulation, it's an observation, rather than actually being the electrons themselves. That's the distinction I'm getting.
I see.
So-
Well, in this case, you're not just like detached from the experiment. You have the choice in the experiment to either.
But it's the
you could
observer's choice. It's not. It's not. I find that to be a very big stretch from an observer's choice into the idea that the brain itself is choosing something.
Well, I mean, you could trace back. I mean, you could instead of putting a single electron going through the slit, you could trace that back to, I don't know, like a whole series. You know, you wouldn't see all these effects because you're only looking for the quantum effects in the very special setup with the particles going through the slit to hit the screen. But there would still be that big causal chain of, you know, say the particle either left.
But it's the observer. Do you get what I'm getting at, though? We're talking about something from the outside in. And this is fundamentally a problem with all neurological and all cognitive modeling, is the fact that you can't actually get into the inside process of the phenomenon.
You're talking
It's a
about the
problem with
mind?
science in
You're talking
general.
about going into the brain? Well, yeah, this is what John Bell was talking about. I mean, when he said...
Well, I guess.
But
guess
also
what I was
John Bell's
getting
a
at-
physicist, and he's not a cognitive scientist.
I
But he
guess
was
what I'm
talking
getting
about
at
free will.
is that this applies to matter on the whole, right? Whether or not you choose the particle or not, it applies to matter on the whole, and so by extension, you can take, you know, the free will of the experimenter to choose the behavior of the particle. You know, yeah, that's just one particle, but then by extension, that same principle applies to all the matter, all the way up from the particle to.
But how do you even know that the experimenter is quote unquote having the free will to choose? Again,
it's the theorem. It doesn't tell you whether or not we have free will. It gives up a way to test or a criterion under which we would have free will, basically.
And this is why John Bell said, and I can quote him here, is that the only way out of it, in it he says, it involves absolute determinism in the universe, complete absence of free will. Suppose the world is super deterministic, and so he goes on to say that would mean that our choices have been determined from the very moment of time. But the problem is there's really no evidence for superdeterminism. And so what the Bell experiment shows is that we can speak of these choices made by the observer, and the only way out of it is just to say, well, there's superdeterminism, those choices have been determined by some hidden variable.
Well, I mean, the problem is both notions are inherently untestable.
Superdeterminism?
Yes, it's an untestable assertion because we can't, I can't.
Right.
There's no way to map the entire universe
Right.
without a computer the size of the entire universe.
Right, and that's what we're saying. And,
But by the same token, though, yours is untestable.
Well, they have ruled out both hidden variables, both classes of hidden variables.
See, I dislike that. I guess I'm not a physicist, but so I can't really speak on it. But all the experiments that I've read have posited it as if, well, if there are hidden variables, they need to abide by what we say they need to abide by. I can't think of a specific example, but I've read some of the indeterminacy experiments that are out there, and they basically say that, oh, well, these hidden variables that we posit, they have to react this way in order for them to exist, and that's just silly.
Okay, the reason for that, realistic nihilist, is, remember the other day I explained that entanglement thing to you, where that was the first test of hidden variables, and they were saying, okay, you have these two particles in superposition, and so Einstein originally said, well, they can't, quantum mechanics can't possibly be complete because that would mean you could put these two particles in superposition and separate them apart and then measure one, and then instantaneously on the other side of the universe, the other one changes or is affected instantly, right? And so they tested that, and that would make no sense. It would be like having, obviously there's nothing connecting you with the voodoo doll, and so it'd just be like, what Einstein called spooky action at a distance with no reason for it. So they tested that, and so now then along came non-local hidden variables, and those were falsified also later in 2007. But the thing is if those hidden variables did exist, they would have to be traveling faster, have to be able to travel faster than light, and that wouldn't relativity is the problem. So that's why they were saying that hidden variables don't exist, because they're having this case with you actually seeing spooky action at a distance in the laboratory, and relativity would prohibit any signals from going across. That would be, correlating them in some hidden variable sort of way.
You're right, and that's exactly what I'm saying. these hidden variables that we were talking about, we're actually not talking about anything. We don't know what we're talking about. But we're saying we're dictating from our perception how they need to behave. And they could be a totally different physical phenomenon that we don't understand, right?
Perhaps,
Right,
but the thing is quantum fields, I mean, quantum fields obey relativity insofar as, you're dealing with, like, you want to put it in like a boson kind of language. You have a field that is being well, let's say it's photons, for example. You have photons interacting. Well, photons are light particles, so they're limited by the speed of light. So if you have two entangled photons, that same quantum field that they're part of is not going to allow a signal to transmit between them faster than light.
And
so
if you're going
from within the logic of the field itself that is expressing this entanglement, that same field will not violate relativity.
And if you're going to...
The point I'm making is I'm not trying to advocate any one position. I'm saying we're deriving a position from ignorance is what that sounds like to me. I'm not advocating determinacy or anything. I'm just saying that from that position, it sounds like you're arguing from a position that you can't possibly understand. You're saying we don't know, therefore free will.
Well, okay,
it kind of sounds like you're saying the same thing.
What?
Well, it kind of sounds like you're saying the same thing. We don't know, therefore hidden variable theories are causing determinism.
No, I'm not saying therefore, and I'm not...
Well, the topic is free will rather than just determinism, so you should be clear here.
Honestly, that'll be in 2 weeks, that other thing.
That would be realism, I thought. Or,
it will be physicalism versus idealism.
Idealism.
Yeah. It could go...
determinism is a separate... But yeah, I suppose they're kind of correlated. But yeah, determinism is a separate issue, I suppose.
I mean, I suppose we're somewhat limited by vocabulary here. I mean, it'd be different if we were all physicists and we were familiar with the mathematics and we could go through all of the Greek numerical stuff here. But the problem is that unfortunately, this is stuff that it would take 10 years of research to be able to do competently, and even then, you're probably even going to be in the middle of the field and not even someone who can really speak to the state of the field, unfortunately.
Let me clarify your objection, inspiring philosophy. As far as it's concerned scientifically, I'm agnostic, and I don't assume any philosophical position from admitted ignorance from science, because I'm not saying I don't know. What I'm saying is that everything that we seem to understand, and everything being so well intertwined, and some sort of essential unity that goes back to everything, which rats might call the mind of this holographic god or whatever, that it seems only cogent that things are interdependent as opposed to independent.
Could I ask IEP a question?
Okay.
You said before that you pick from among competing reasons, but what does that look like? I mean, say you pick a reason which is weaker than the others, less compelling to you, then in what sense is that free?
Well, as you just said, I would pick. I mean, I'm picking it. So, I mean, I have these various choices in front of me, and I select from them of what I could possibly do.
But what makes you pick something which you have less reason to pick than something else?
I'm sorry for the confusion. What I'm saying is that we have these various reasons, or these various choices, and we can rationally postulate different ones. We can go through, look at them all, and then go with the one that we feel would be best. And in saying that, I would have to agree with Aristotle that I am the first cause. I am the one who's actually causing that choice to go about. I think it's a little bit more of a stress to say that those reasons or those prior desires are going to cause me to make those.
Okay, well, let me interject here, because we've been kind of going down a quantum rabbit hole, and I think it's a little more down to earth than that, and I'm a philosopher, not a scientist. But let me just ask everybody, why did you come on the show? Nobody forced you to come into this conversation. You made a choice to come here. Now, why did you choose to come here and talk about this particular topic, or talk about this type of stuff, concerning philosophy and free will or whatever? Why would you do that? Well, could it be your upbringing? Could it be your physical constitution? There are determinations. There are causes. And to say that, well, you're the one who caused you to come on the show, I think is a little bit naive to choose to come on the show, as if you're the only variable, as if you're the cause. Well, yeah, you're part of the link in the chain, but what caused you to have the nature from which this will that chooses this type of activity, what caused you to have that nature? And is your will an expression of that nature? So I don't think there's a question of, do we have free will? I think the question is, what do we mean by free will? And how free?
Well, it seems like you're ordering some sort of compatibilism.
Well, I think he's trying to get the distinction between what is approximate and an ultimate cause. I mean, to some degree, me choosing to be on here was the fact that it's cooler in the place that I'm at rather than at my house, which currently doesn't have internet, and then, me being friends with, et cetera, rather than the ultimate cause really being the fact that I was born with a certain neurology, that I was raised in a certain way. Most of the choices that led me to get here, if you are to call them choices, were not even made by me. And how do you disentangle those two parts of what supposedly will is?
Yeah, I'm not arguing.
Well, I would say that those would. I would say those probably would affect your actions probabilistically. I mean, it would if you're raised a certain way, you may be more likely to turn out a certain way, but you would still be able to. It wouldn't determine you outright. It would just give you a statistically higher chance of doing A.
Well, in your opinion.
Guys,
yeah, I mean that's how I would think of free will.
That is purely conjecture.
We have a caller, Kenchi. I think Rats knows him, and he wants to bring up some.
Oh
point.
yeah, sure. Bring him in.
He has some point, but yeah.
Oh,
something about what James said.
Oh, he's just on my. Is he? He's listening, right?
Yeah, he's in there somewhere, I think.
Yeah, just add him. I can't add him. I don't know.
I just didn't. What the hell?
Oh, that's odd.
Hey guys, just call me atheist.
Atheist.
Yeah, because otherwise people, when this goes on YouTube, they're not going to know who the hell I am. So,
gotcha.
On my
Well, you could just change your name.
No.
I'll call you J-Bone.
Okay, I'll do it on the call. I'll add text right below your thing.
There you go.
Now, isn't there a massive tangent about the self working here?
Yeah.
And that, IP says that, I can pick among competing reasons. That to me doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay, you happy now, James?
Hold on, I'm going to be right back in about 10 seconds. I got to grab something.
You happy, James?
I don't know. I didn't see what you did. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I think what Cheeky says were about the self. I mean, are we arguing that we are nothing but a collection of atoms, or is there something more to there? Now, if that's the case, if we're nothing but a collection of atoms, then shouldn't we be able to make someone decide just by putting electrical wires, hypothetical science fiction stuff? I mean, wouldn't we be able to just make someone decide by hooking someone's brain up to a machine?
Well, there are neurological
Sam,
experiments that have done that.
Kenchi, do you read us?
Yes.
Okay, so what did you want to state?
Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Nice. I think Johanna had already made the point that I was going to make. And James was saying that, I would try to cut it short. I think it does not necessarily have to be free will or not free will. Maybe the answer is somewhere in the middle, as Johanna mentioned. Maybe there is some kind of a probabilistic decision space, and that space is narrowed by all the influencing factors, and we still may have, at least I think so, at least we still have some wiggle room within that factors. but the more we realize those constricting factors, the more free our will seems to become. That is the point that I was going to make, and I wanted to hear what you guys think of that.
Well, I would kind of agree, and that's what I was trying to hit on at the beginning. I'm not saying that we're picking our desires. We have a probability. We are able to look through various ones and almost make a multiple choice decision, I guess you could say. I don't know if I like that term, but if that's what you're hitting on, then that's what I agree. I don't feel that we get to pick a lot of these influences or these desires or these innate feelings, but we get to pick from them in a probability sense.
Yeah, but...
Well, I disagree with that as simply being, to some degree, an argument from ignorance, if you'll forgive me, because we can see, and I mean, I'd rather play the role of the agnostic in this situation and say, well, there's not enough proof right now. An example would be that if you look at sickle cell anemia, which is a disease that is a type of anemia that is entirely genetic, but we didn't actually know what that, we being the biologist and the geneticist, didn't know what was causing that disease. They just knew that people who were from sub-Saharan Africa tended to have this morphology of their hemoglobin and their blood cells. And what ended up happening is they discovered the gene for it, and now it went from something where it was just a probabilistic thing that you were more likely to have it if your ancestry was from sub-Saharan Africa, to now we can say with pretty much 100% certainty, given your genetic code, whether you're going to have the disease. And it's one of those things where you don't want to say anything, definite or take a stance until we actually have an answer.
Yeah, of course. But aren't genes switched on and off?
One at a time.
Well, in sickle cell, that would be different for different genes, but for sickle cell anemia, it's entirely genetic. It's entirely dependent on your allotype, which is the alleles that you have.
So it's pretty much a death sentence.
It is. Well, it's not a death sentence. You can easily live with it. Just don't go to high altitude and don't exert yourself too much. It's actually an evolutionary this is too much of an aside, but it's an evolutionary adaptation to it's malaria. Excuse me. Sorry, I had something in my throat.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you. I did not know that.
Yep.
But I wouldn't say that's what we say free will is.
Yeah, but if we go back, Johan, Johan, you I think you were already going to make that point, but I was raising the argument that there may be probability-based decision spaces. And isn't that also a theory for quantum mechanics?
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention with Sam is, there's certain things where we could say it's probabilistic, and then it turns out that it's not really probabilistic. It's just because we don't know of something at that point, right? So you learn more, and then you discover that what was a probability is now actually certain and all that. And you keep going on like this. The one kind of fly in the ointment with this, though, is that we do know in science there is at least one place, and this doesn't prove free will, mind you, but just opens up the possibility of it, that there is actually true indeterminism at some point, which isn't explained by any hidden variables. It's uncertainty. And so if the mind can somehow exploit that, then there is a window through which free will could operate.
But again, without a mechanism, and I'd like realistic to go next, but without a mechanism, it does turn into blind speculation. And I'm not. Right. I'm willing to accept a possibility, but I'm not willing to accept blind speculation on the basis of one finding.
Mm-hmm. I will.
Losing rats.
A book here by. What?
No, go on.
Yeah, I have a book by a guy. I think you might like this, Sam. Actually. Evan Harris Walker. It's called Physics of Consciousness, and I know you might think it's in the Quantum Mind book, and some of it is. He's actually a really smart guy. He's like 100 patents. But
in general, I don't read popular science books. I talk to actual scientists.
He has the equations in the book. It's in between popular science and it's a popular science book in a sense, but it's a little more intelligent than the average popular science book. So what's really nice here is that he gets into neurology as well as this.
But again,
And,
it's very difficult if you don't have someone who is who is working to if it's co-authored by a PhD in neurology, then that's a different thing. But I think we should go to realistic because he's had a point and he's been waiting.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to address something. I think it's very important because of the discussion to address what we think of temporal states. I mean, I'm wondering if you, Rats, and Inspiring Philosophy both think that time is some sort of illusion, that there is no fluid concept of time.
I think Rat should answer this. He's got a lot of good stuff on it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you run into relativity, right? And relativity, of course, we haven't produced a time machine yet. There's what's his name in I believe MIT is working on this.
Talking about the guy with the lasers.
Yeah, the circular laser device. He wants to focus the energy.
Pretty much just a time machine from when it was made or something.
Yeah. And that's how all time machines in general relativity work, with maybe the exception of curved singularities, but I don't want to go into that right now. So basically, the whole thing with general relativity is it predicts various time travel solutions, right? And if that's true, then logically that would mean that I'm getting feedback.
James, can you close your volume and mute it? We okay now?
Yeah. Okay. So
Okay, we're good.
if general relativity is predicting time travel, then that would mean, in some sense, that the past is akin to a place that you can go to, and so time would no longer just be fluid moving forwards. It would also be a kind of like you remember the B theory of time, where you have like all time like a big film strip, and so you have instants all along the way, and there's the past, present, and future. But the past is in a sense a location, and you can actually travel to the past or the future.
See, I can't. Okay, this sounds like there's a bunch of cognitive dissonance going around, because you're telling me that in the future you'll be in the past, is essentially what you're telling me, and that sounds so senseless.
Weird. Well, we'll just think of it this way. Suppose someone 100 years from now invents a time machine that's in the future, 100 years in the future, and then you use their time machine in the future and you travel to the past.
As much as I'm a Michael J. Fox fan,
Rats,
I'm not saying that these are possible.
Rats, wouldn't that mean they would have to affect, in a sense, the universe in order to travel back in time?
Well, they would. Well, no, the idea is that it would curve space-time, yes, but the idea is that time itself would not be. Time would be like a location in a sense.
Yeah. So you have to be in a sense teleported, I guess, to a different location in space and time, right?
Okay. Well, if I can actually return to my original point, when what Inspiring Philosophy is talking about when he's talking about making choices, he's talking about projections. He's talking about mental projections. You take an idea and then you project it upon a certain time frame, right? You say, okay, well, where will I be 20 years from now if I make this choice, or 20 years from now if I make this choice? Obviously, some people are not that cognizant of their choices, and he's saying he's saying even determinists. He made a point that even determinists say they have these projections and they feel like they could have made different choices, but unless and I feel really weird talking about that, because I don't think they could have. I think that they're speculating mental projections, and of that they still do not know. They're saying to say I could have is a very loaded term, and to me it's like, no, you couldn't have. You speculate that it may have been a possibility for.
God damn it!
This is why determinism makes sense philosophically to me, because in my opinion the future
comes from identity.
In my opinion, the future will be. Now, in order for someone to tell me that there is free will or there is not determinism, I'm not saying they're not compatible. Like, I could be a compatibilist. I don't know. I don't really know. But in order to say that it's not deterministic, they would have to somehow demonstrate to me that the future will not be the way it will be.
What if there are more than one future?
That doesn't make any sense to me. more than
Well,
one.
like many worlds theory, for example. I mean, you have.
But again, I mean, I hate to say this, but we're kind of leading down the path of blind speculation. And I mean, at least to me, it's not very interesting. You know, I could speculate 1,000 things, but until you actually, test it, it's really just,
I just told you Tuesday.
for lack of a better word, mental masturbation.
Well, if we take the free will part of it out of it and just like focus on the determinism for a moment. I mean, we have a decent amount of tested science to get to some kind of conclusion on that, whether or not that leads ultimately to free will.
But the problem with it is it's all with respect to what you're measuring. So when we talk, see, this is the issue: is when you talk about locality and realism and determinism, you're talking about it with respect to a very specific non-colloquial sense, and then we try to expand. I mean, it's very, very difficult without getting muddled and without having a research grant in front of you to elucidate any of these ideas.
Well, I mean, for example, in the Conway-Coken theorem, and that one is established science. That one gives us at least one way in which it would be. I mean, that is a colloquial example. The choice of the experimenter to pull the slits up or to pull the slide up or not in the back is.
But there's two
case.
interpretations of that as whether it's I mean, again, this is more philosophy of science, excuse me, but it all comes down to methodology and theoretical frameworks and whether, it can be accounted for in any other way within this theoretical framework. And to that extent, I will definitely agree with you, but it's all much more limited and much more, I don't want to say contrite because that's not the connotation I want, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, if you're going to say that that's all
someone's internet connection's screwing up the call, but can I, Kenshi, you have a point to do before you have to, have to bring someone else in?
Yeah, no problem. And that's the last thing that I wanted to add, because I'm pretty sure everybody agrees that we're speculating here, but there's something good about speculation, because by speculation you can try to find a model that works and explains things better than the old model that we have, and then you can decide whether this model is worth experimenting and testing. So I want to propose a theory that can explain determinism in a way, and Hegel interpretation. And if you look at the probability or at the waveform of a photon, and you watch this photon as a probability, I would call it a little piece of undivided wholeness, and send that through the delayed choice quantum eraser, which basically splits the possible paths of the photons and reunites them, and then makes a measurement, and therefore shows that there's a elasticity to the collapse of wave function. And if you watch this probability wave as not a thing actually existing, but as a undivided cluster of things that could possibly exist until when they are measured, this opens up a very interesting conclusion, because it shows that when there's the possibility to split the paths of the photons and then reunite them, you're actually bringing back all the possibilities that have been sorted out by the simple double-slit experiment. You're just bringing all the possibilities back into the game by reuniting the two paths and then making a choice. So it shows that that the collapse of the wave function is brought back. They are not. They have not gone away in a sense, but they're still there, and that again is an argument for decision spaces which are then collapsed into one decision. So if that is true in the micro universe of or in the let's say quantum realm, I'm pretty sure that this is also true, or this is speculation, of course, but it might be true that these.
I
sorry,
just have I wish I could comment on this. I don't have a PhD in quantum physics.
Oh, should I elaborate on that? Because
well, no. It's an interesting idea, but I don't know if I can speak for all of us, but I would have no idea what to do with that, and that's not a knock on you. That's a knock on myself, I would say.
No problem. I would just maybe explain very.
Was I the only one who had the my connection just
my
froze?
Skype thing says that someone's internet is affecting the call. One or more people have insufficient broadband to broadcast their video. So I'm guessing it's maybe Kenshi or you, Rats, because you're the one who just disconnected.
Well, I have a 100K connection.
That's it?
It's not me because I'm using the faculty and staff network at the university I'm at, and no one is on that except for me and whoever also decided that Sundays
I will drop out of the call soon. So maybe
I'm using my faster computer, and I did close a couple pages out just in case, though.
I don't think it's me because I'm at Keene State and I'm using faculty stuff too, so I'm not really...
Okay.
Oh, good on you.
Maybe,
I'm like an hour away
me.
from... I've run cross-country races at your place. In the past, of course.
Okay, maybe it's me. I will just finish my point and then I'm gone. The delayed choice quantum eraser, very basic experiment. It's in very simple terms. It's through a polarized filter, and since the photon the photon is not yet existing because it's a probability wave, but since it's either the left or the right wave, and then reunites these two paths, and then there's another measurement done, like in a typical double slit fashion, and then you will arrive at either you will arrive at either a bar pattern or a wave pattern, which I'm pretty sure you know from the double slit experiment. If you have not heard about that, you should really check it out because it's super cool.
No, I know the experiment. I would just say that I can at least speak. I mean, unless someone in here covertly has a PhD in physics, it's a good idea, but none of us, I think, are prepared to be able to address it, unfortunately.
Okay.
Oh yeah. So experiments. Maybe Chris Lucas could answer. Actually, yeah, he might be able to answer. I don't know.
Maybe.
Johanna, could you maybe show some stuff on the whole probability wave theory? Because I'm sure you have something on that. Maybe you can put that up for all the.
Oh yeah, I mean we were discussing the Conway-Kochen theorem before.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So maybe it's there. One last thing. And I'm just going at this from another angle, but it's basically the same conclusion. There's this monistic idealist theory that is fundamental to reality, and this is of course.
I don't want to
right now. Yeah, I'm not asking any of you to believe this, but just stay with me for a minute. If there's been an experiment been done. In which they asked people to raise their arm when they want, or press a button in the moment that they want. But the experiment actually showed that the measurements showed that the scientists could see on their measurement before the person was even aware that he was deciding to push the button or raise his arm. And this has often been used against free will, this experiment, but I'm soon going back to this. And there was another experiment where they were showing people random pictures, some with gruesome content, some with lovely content, and every time they were showing someone gruesome content, their skin resistance would go up. So they were in advance afraid, but they had not yet seen the picture, and the computer had not yet typed to the picture.
That's Biermann's response, I believe.
I'm not sure how this is called, but it's a really cool experiment. You should look it up. I can provide some sources when I'm back.
It sounds like Biermann's response, but...
I'd have to look at it in detail, because just from hearing the design, it's not very good. But I'm sure that they did a better I'm sure that they had some interesting stuff in there.
Yeah, I'm very, and I'm just putting this down in layman's terms, of course. Yeah. So there are these two cases of very weird cases of the body knowing something before it actually happened, and or before it kind of rose into awareness of someone. And there's been something that has been proposed that is called the video lag theory, and it is very neat actually, because if you think about it, if consciousness is fundamental and outside space-time, it would, from our perspective, be infinitely fast, because it's outside of space-time. So in order to interact with something that is within space-time, that very something would have to be prepared for that, because otherwise it would be, everything would seem infinitely slow. So there's been this theory.
I hate to interrupt you, Kenshi, but again, I have to reiterate what I said to Rats, is that I'm not particularly interested in blind speculation, and this is very interesting, but I'm worrying that we're getting kind of far off topic.
Well, yeah,
Oh,
I
sure.
was gonna say, could we possibly...
I'll be done in 10 seconds, so...
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
You got 10 seconds.
My eyes have glazed over.
Yeah, sure. They may. Let me just get back on track, because you kind of threw me out there. Okay, so the theory was that in order to interact with our body, our consciousness determines the future and sends that decision back in time in order for our body to react. So the conclusion from that would be that we already made our future choices but forgot about them, and then reenacted them from our bodily perspective. I think it's a neat theory. I'm not asking any of you to believe this, but combined with the whole idea of probability waves and the implications for idealism, it raises an interesting point and explains some things in a very elaborate fashion, I suppose.
Okay, Kenshi,
Henry Stapp, kind of following on what Kenshi was saying, I saw it was a debate with a whole bunch of people, but in particular, I believe this was Henry Stapp versus, he's a famous physicist, versus Michael Shermer, and they were discussing, it was basically retrocausality, where you had...
Yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah. Remember Mlodinow and Hawking mentioned it in their book. They said, like, the present selects the past from a superposition of many possible histories. It's where you determine in the past what the wave is going to be, or the particle is going to be in the delayed choice quantum eraser. And before that, there is no history. It's like you load a back history up on the instant you measure it. So at least in the context of the quantum eraser, whether or not that applies to the brain is a additional topic. But in that one case.
So Kenshi, pleasure having you on. I'm gonna kick you now.
Yeah. Okay. See ya.
Okay. So can we possibly go over the definition of free will again, since we haven't really discussed what it meant exactly, I guess?
Yeah, I could do that again. I mean, again, this is...
Anyway, I think you defined it as maximally
No, that's what I said it wasn't. I mean, that it's definitely not maximal autonomy. It's generally the ability to make decisions in your environment as you being the first cause. So, for example, I cannot pick my desires, I cannot pick my past or what the information I take in is, but I do have the ability to focus, to think upon it, and then rationally decide from there.
Don't we need to talk about you?
One at a time. Cheeky, you want to go first?
Yeah, don't we need to talk about alternative possibilities? Because that's what hasn't, and you guys have said some interesting things, and in your video IP, you talk about Ayn Rand and, how deliberating and focusing gives you free will. Well, I don't see why that's an argument for libertarianism and not compatibilism.
Well, compatibilists would say that those are still determined. I mean, there are different types of compatibilists, so I hope I'm not misrepresenting someone who may be a hard or soft or somewhere in the middle. But they would say that those desires have determined our actions, but we are those desires, so we're technically still making the choices. They would say they're compatible. The libertarian would say, no, we have these desires, and we're selecting from them a choice that we are going to postulate.
I'm gonna kick myself in the head for saying this, but I think Strife had a point when he said he identified the you as being your desires, and you somewhat agreed with him back in the beginning of the show. And right there, it sounded like you made a dichotomy between the self and your desires.
That's kind of what I was. That's what kind of I was
How do you
thinking that he
resolve
said. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm not saying those are not part of you. I mean, my arm is part of me, but I'm not my arm. I mean, there are.
No, he means your feelings, your desires. He's not talking about your body.
Well, yeah, neither am I. I'm using an analogy.
Oh.
I mean, there are parts of us, but I'm talking about the actual decision-making process. So, for example, a neuroscience, Walter Penfield wrote a book that I read a while back called The Mystery of the Mind, and where he was experimenting on patients, and he was hooking electrical stimulations up to parts of the brains, and he was causing their arm to move. He was causing them vocal reactions. He was causing them to recall memories. But he said, and he gets to the point after page 70, he says, there is no place in the cerebral cortex where electrical stimulation will cause a patient to decide. So what he's saying is that you cannot force me to decide something. That comes from my conscious free will. I mean,
Isn't that an argument from ignorance because he hasn't discovered the proper cortical wiring yet? I mean, there's been some really interesting research in the area of, I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with neuroscience, but in the areas of long-term potentiation and cortical circuitry.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at some of the studies, and what they're seeing is that parts of the brain light up when...
No, that's not at all what I'm referring to, but continue.
So, excuse me. So what they're saying, though, is that there is no way to hook up an electrical signal and cause someone to decide. Now, you can say they're arguing from ignorance. That has not been discovered. Well, that's kind of arguing that in the future they're going to find this. Well, they are looking throughout the entire brain. They cannot find a place to force someone.
But they're limited by, I mean, you do realize that all of these studies, I mean, there are only two ways to, are you aware of the two ways that you can measure electrical potentiation in the brain? There's patch clamp and there's fMRI. What patch clamp is, or I should say EEG, not fMRI. fMRI is, that is blood flow, excuse me, but that can show you cortical activity. But so it's three ways. But the problem is it's limited by methodology. You have patch clamp, which essentially you hook up an electrode to an individual axon. And so you can only measure one cell at a time. And then you also have EEG, which is electrical you can measure, electrical firing. And then you have fMRI, which is blood flow, which is, I could go over what that does, but I assume we all know what MRIs are. It's always the problem with science that you're always limited and confined by your techniques available. So I'm not going to let you, just say, oh, this guy couldn't find it, therefore it ain't there, when we're very, very confined in terms of, especially in terms of ethics.
Well, then you're also arguing from ignorance if you're saying that, because you're saying, well, it could be there.
I'm saying I don't know, which I believe is the scientific and correct way to say that.
Okay, but then if we're going to look at it like that, then we're both just speculating. What I'm trying to say, though, is going back to the original definition of free will. The definition of free will comes from intuition, what the layman would think he has if you ask him on the street, that he has the ability to make a decision in any given situation between A, B, C, D, or E, F, G, H, I, J, K, all the way up there, that he would have so many choices to make. Now, in that sense, this is why determinists are always saying they have to show that free will is in fact an illusion, because in the intuition perspective, we think we have free will. So if we're going to be doing speculating, and we're going to start from somewhere like some basis, we start from the intuition perspective, that in our intuition, we do think we have some sort of free will. And so this is why libertarians have said, for decades, it's really on the determinists to show that this is actually an illusion.
I have 1 point to respond to this, and then someone else can get to it. How many degrees are in a triangle? How many degrees do the angles
180 have? In a Euclidean space, and then it's different.
Right, and how long did Euclidean spaces remain the only definition based upon the intuition that for over reasonable approximations the Earth is flat?
I
That's
get
intuition is utterly useless.
Right, I was gonna add to IP's thing because I mean, yes, it is just intuition, and it seems good enough to go on. But I was kind of.
And I'm saying that's a basis. I'm not saying that's how we go on.
I was anticipating someone responding with that, saying, maybe our intuitions are wrong, but there is a kind of a more formal argument, just from like logical epistemic considerations that we would have free will, and this was. Believe it or not, actually, one of my favorite atheist debate, Dorpaton, and I disagree with him on a lot, but he made a really good argument here in favor of free will, and he was saying, if we are not the cause of our choices, or the way we think, then our thoughts have been predetermined before us by some other, say, chemical actions in the brain or whatever. But if that's the case, then we don't actually know if our chemical actions in the brain are wired up to produce proper logical thinking. Maybe they're going to cause our thinking to short circuit, and so if we're not actually in control of our thoughts, then we wouldn't have any reason to actually trust them ultimately. Maybe they would all be wrong.
That would be the point of empirical testing, wouldn't it?
What
sensory information.
I'm saying this on a much deeper level of like this would nuke epistemology basically. You couldn't even know if you could do science. You maybe hallucinating everything out in the outside world altogether, and your brain is tricking you into thinking that it's all real. And
that's a possibility, but we don't argue from that because it's a logical absurdity.
It's a relative principle.
Right. That's what he's getting at. Is it led to
absurdity? But again, this is like arguing that I hate to draw this comparison because I hate Godwin's law, but this is like saying evolution is false because Hitler used evolutionary reasoning, and evolution leads to X, Y, and Z in terms of society.
Well, this is different.
It's a silly line. The consequences of the truth doesn't take away from what the truth is.
Oh yeah, I know. I mean, my favorite political philosophy, by the way, is Straussianism. I deal with this concept called a noble lie and a dangerous truth. These are very common conceptions. So I know the concept of something can be true but dangerous at the same time. But what I'm saying though is different than that. I'm saying that if we're not in control of our own thinking, then it would mean that we could not trust our own thoughts because they wouldn't really be ours anymore. They would be.
Okay, this is.
Yes, I see what you were saying now, Alex. I see what you're saying now because
It's just silly because it turns in. No offense, it's just silly because we still are relativizing from the assumption that we can know things about the universe.
Well, we can know at least one thing about the universe.
Well, yeah, but you know what I'm saying, though.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but I guess I get what you're saying, but like. There's a point where basically the additional thing added to that, and I suppose it was in a sense an incomplete argument because the last premise of it was kind of unsaid and thought it was so obvious as to not need to be said. But we know that we can know something, right? That was way back. Plato kind of established that we know that there is some knowledge because if we say I know that I don't know, that's a contradiction in terms. I mean, in terms of all knowledge. And so what I'm getting at is that if we're not in control of our thoughts, we could have no claim to any knowledge at all because it wouldn't really be thoughts that were doing it. There would be an illusion of thoughts caused by some material precursor, which may only be leading to rational thinking that we think is rational thinking.
And this is what Tom Hartfield says as well. I mean, he says
but if you have no problem with that, then then that would mean that.
I mean, it's all. The way that I view it, and again, this is only one view. Is that consciousness is an evolutionary adaptation, or the illusion of consciousness, I should say, is an evolutionary adaptation that's useful for our species, and perhaps more species, given how we understand the cortical wiring of certain other mammals.
I have a question.
But this is, again, it's down speculation, and I would never... Those are just my own opinion. I wouldn't even say it's true because I would say I don't know.
Well, if it's all speculation, then I would say that what you're saying is actually speculation. I mean,
that would be exactly what my last sentence was.
Yeah, that's what he admitted. That's what he
okay.
I mean, I can be accused of being an irascible asshole, but I am honest.
Yeah. The question then is consciousness an illusion, though?
Mm-hmm.
Now, can we say that? And if it is an illusion, to whom is it an illusion?
Before we go there, Realistic, what you want to say?
I think the problem of vagueness is paramount in these discussions. I think we need to define the I because Rats is saying things like I'm in control of things or I am the primary cause. When exactly did you become you, and what exactly is you that is the primary cause?
Yeah, actually, okay, now I see what you mean by you're stealing from me. I just did a lecture on this yesterday, so I was kind of wondering that myself. Like, why? What are you guys talking about? You seem to be, or at least inspiring philosophy, you seem to have this kind of set up the self and cut it into different divisions, so like the will, and then there's this thing that is beyond thoughts and is actually in control of thoughts. And aren't we our thoughts? What are, and then you talk about these parts. Well, for instance, you talk about a body part. Well, the body part is actually arbitrary. You can't really tell me where my hand begins and ends.
No, I was using that as an analogy to explain something in terms of our desires.
Right, but it doesn't work because it's not a good analogy because parts are arbitrary. You can't tell me where my arm absolutely begins and my hand begins. This gets into the problem of vagueness.
I have a question actually about this. When he used the word intuition, would you say like would this sentence make sense with that word you defined it as? It's our intuition that our senses are correct. Like we think our senses are correct. That's our intuition.
That would be an intuition thing. Yeah, we would say that we think we can trust our thoughts. Yeah.
No, I meant our senses. I didn't say.
But I wonder, if you put this kind of reliability in intuition, and this is why I don't trust intuition. One of the great lessons I've learned from the PI in my lab, when intuition in the past has proven to be, and granted this is inductive, has proven to be very wrong on certain things and very right on certain things, and I would argue that's because of evolutionary adaptation, though.
And I would agree with that.
Opinion.
That's where I would push it past intuition to like kind of the a priori knowledge idea. So it's not merely. I mean, we have a lot of intuitions which are wrong.
And that's what I said. Intuition is a starting place. I didn't say it was the only argument.
But hold on, I would like to kind of go beyond IP a little bit there, and suggest that it's not merely intuition in itself. It's we actually know we know at least one thing. We know that knowledge exists. Because to deny that knowledge exists is to say, I know that I don't know, which is a contradiction in terms. So we know that knowledge is possible. In order to know that knowledge is possible, we have to possess our own thoughts in a sense. Whether you want to say I in a Cartesian sense, or maybe we have a decentralized I, that some people have speculated about that too. But in either case, our thoughts have to be our own. Otherwise, we don't know if they're actually justified. And if we don't know that we're justified, then we don't have knowledge because knowledge requires justification. But we do know that we have knowledge because to deny knowledge is to violate non-contradiction. So therefore, we have to essentially possess our own thoughts.
Well,
James had to say something.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like you guys are presupposing some sort of enduring self that is static. Like some sort of Cartesian soul or something, ego that is static, that isn't changing, that you can point to and go, that's me. And I'm asking, what's your justification for that? What part of you hasn't changed? I mean, I'm not just talking about physiology here. Obviously, your cells changed and everything. But even your way of thinking and everything that makes you who you are, your personality, what you think, the way you think, all of these things are products and are constantly changing. So, I guess I have this Nietzschean notion of becoming. I don't have this static notion of being. So I'm kind of wondering, you guys seem to be smuggling a lot of and presupposing a lot of things like that.
Well, that's why I said that. I thought I realize this, and there's a lot of validity to that. But what I'm saying is, like, that's why I said that, whether or not it's a Cartesian cell I or like kind of a decentralized I, where it's, you are your thoughts or you are simply the integrated information, in your mind, right? And so it's not like an I separate. It's you literally are the set of information, and there is no one I. The I is the whole thing, basically.
Okay.
But
So-
that argument, the issue of knowledge, though, would apply whether or not you're a centralized Cartesian ego or a decentralized network of information. Either the Cartesian ego has the knowledge, or the decentralized network has the knowledge. But in either
Right,
case,
'cause
whatever it is
so-
has the knowledge.
he says, I think, therefore I am, but actually he could just say thinking is occurring, and that thinking is like what I call myself. So thinking is building on itself. There's not like this object that is emanating thinking or producing thinking, right? Thinking is the object.
Well, I'm kind of taking an agnostic position on whether or not. What I'm saying is that this argument works whether or not you assume the object emanating the thinking or the thinking itself is the thinker, in a sense.
Okay. Now I kind of wanted to bring this back a little, and I hope you guys don't mind. But I'd like to bring this back. And, Nietzsche had Nietzsche did a lot of psychology, and he prided himself on psychology. And one of the things that Nietzsche noted was that everything we choose is based on will to power considerations. So, for example, one may choose to believe or accept egalitarianism because it suits their will to power if they're in a wheelchair. In other words, if they're not equal, it's beneficial for them and will to power to be considered equal, and for everyone else around them to believe in equality, because then that suits their will to power. That evens everything out for them. So everything we do is subconsciously has to do with will to power considerations. Most things we believe for inner motives, for will to power considerations. For example, many of us like to argue and debate because we are exerting our mastery over something. We are exerting our power, and our intellectual capabilities are a power. And as Nietzsche would say, that it is the intrinsic nature of life which is the will to power. It is the will to domination. And so even a will to mastery over a subject is a way of accomplishing that telos, that is to exert oneself, one's power over another.
Before, are you done with that, James?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, Realistic Analyst wants to say something, and then...
I want to say something after about James, because his thing.
Okay, well, Realistic goes first.
Go ahead.
Right, the reason I brought up the problem of Vegas is because we were talking about inspiring philosophy made this appeal to the layman, saying that, oh well, Strive, stop murdering your cat so I can talk.
He's attacking me.
He made this appeal to the layman, saying, oh well, people intuitively know that they have free will, or they have this intuitive feeling of free will, and I feel like they don't know about. I mean, when you say, do you feel like you have free will? And they say, yeah, I feel like I have free will. If you were to continue to posit them the question, so when did you become you? Would the layman know what you're talking about? Would they know how to define themselves? So when you say, do you have free will? And then they say, yeah, and you say, well, what is you? And they say, I don't know. So how do you know that you have free will if you don't even know what you are?
Right, that's why I said that's a starting point. I didn't say that was going to be like the big argument right there. I said because Sir Strive asked me to redefine free will. So that's why I said that's a starting point. So.
But yeah, I know.
It might be better, IP, it might be better to use Dorpaton's argument on that way. Instead of just an intuition, it's more of a rigorous argument.
I think that's also a good argument as well. Yeah. I was just
don't use the word intuition, though, just because then it's
It is confusing people. Yeah, I won't use it anymore. Yeah.
I don't have a problem with you saying that. I don't even have a problem accepting that as a premise, as a starting point. But I'm saying after you kickstart the starting point, if you do it in a way such that I did it, to where you say, who are you? What exactly constitutes you? Are you a culmination of your thoughts? Are you what you desire? And you actually ask these layman people, and they tell you, I don't know. Then that nullifies it as a starting point, because you're saying you don't even know what exactly you are. It's the philosophical problem of vagueness, and that's why it integrates to what you're talking about. Because if they're saying, so it's like, how do you know that you are making decisions at that point if you don't even know what you are? How do you describe this feeling?
Well, I think you're appealing to epistemic skepticism almost in a way and saying, well, how do you know? Well, do you have a reason to give me to doubt that I don't know if I'm making these choices? I mean, that's one of the that's the epistemic particularist response to the skeptics, is that, can you give me a reason to doubt that I'm making these choices? Could you give me a reason to doubt that I should trust my rationality?
And that's what I'm saying. And the reason to doubt is that you cannot identify exactly who you are, and you can't conquer the problem of vagueness. That would be the reason to doubt. Because what are you making these choices? And to ask the layman to say that, they would, I almost certainly would say, I don't even know. Would you say that you're the culmination of your thoughts? I think the most paramount thing to run from this starting point is to define who the you is in your perspective, so we can apply that to whatever layman as if they would give that same answer.
Right, so you're getting into more of the mind question. Is the mind the brain, or is the brain the mind kind of thing?
Certainly, I want to reconcile what James was talking about, which is the problem of vagueness. I think that needs to be reconciled first.
Well, no, what that basically comes down to, and this is more gets into Western philosophy and Eastern metaphysics and Eastern philosophy, like Zen and stuff like that. But what we find is actually that we are an activity in the universe. There is no distinct thing that you could point to and go, that's me. That's the one doing the thinking. There is nothing that is changeless. Everything, and this ties into Nietzsche. This, actually, my next lecture is going to be on Nietzsche's concept of becoming, or at least that's the plan. But this lecture that I gave on this ties into becoming. And so I guess the reason why I'm bringing this up is that both of you seem to be, you and Rayats, and if I'm wrong here, then correct me, but you seem to be operating from this assumption that there's this static being, self, Aristotelian type thing, and then thoughts are emanating from that. And what I'm saying is, no, you can't divorce yourself from the universe. You are simply an activity. You are part of the universe. You are this constant state of becoming. There is no you in the sense of being able to point and say, that's me.
Well, if that's the case, I mean, building on Saul Kripke, there is no necessary condition between the two, the mental and the physical. If you're saying that we have to be part of the universe, I need to go back to what John Bell was saying, that no, this kind of shows that we're not. And the physicist Stephen Barr says in his book, Ancient Faith and Modern Physics, that the mathematical descriptions of the physical world give us to by quantum theory presupposes the existence of observers who lie outside those mathematical descriptions. So no, I would not argue that we are part of that. I would say that from what we're seeing in the Bell experiment, what we're seeing in quantum physics presupposes that we have to lie outside of those mathematical descriptions of the actual world.
Well, actually, it doesn't presuppose that, because you're talking about two different perspectives of the same thing. You forget that I'm coming from a double aspect theory perspective.
So what's the double aspect theory then?
We're not going to go into. I'm not going to give a lecture or a presentation when we're talking about free will. But I guess I can give you. If you haven't read Schopenhauer's writings on this, or any of the later double aspect theorists, I can refer you to some.
Well, I'm just wanting the specifics, kind of like what are you like? Could you bring it to the table? Just sum it up, just so we can go from there.
It's a monist position, and it states that there is a dual, not a dual substance. So I'm not arguing for dualism.
Well, neither would I be. No.
There is a dual epistemology, and that both of these epistemologies are valid. So you have the first-person qualia experience, the subjective awareness, how you feel, taste, touch, color, sound, things like this, and then you have the quantifiable experience, which you were just talking physics, these are objective experiences. Things like shape, for instance. A square will always be a square. It's not really a subjective thing in that sense. So there are dual aspects to the same thing, two different perspectives, two different epistemologies on the same thing.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. But what I'm saying, though, is you're saying that we need to be a part of these mathematical descriptions of the way things play out. And what I'm saying is, from the Bell experiment, it seems to show that, no, we need to be the observer and that these are not really causing us in the same way we would see if that was how it was set up.
There could be a way that would kind of, for instance,
as the same thing, and you seem to be coming out with some sort of dual thing here. You seem
guys, there could be a way to kind of reconcile it to this from an idealist perspective of, when you say that, when you say, we are outside the world looking at it, in a sense that's true because, there's the world of empirical observables, the physical world, but then you can, in the broader sense, like in James' sense, kind of expand the world to mean everything and not just the physical. And so the physical world is yes, we're observing it and all, but we're a part of the world in the larger sense, and both us and what we are observing are manifestations of the larger phenomenon.
Right, and it is in the nature of consciousness to carve up its environment. And I can give you many, many examples of this. For example, when you're talking the body, you carve it up into, here's my hand, here's my arm. We do this for utility reasons, of course, and I would argue for because of the will to power, and that all knowledge is due to the will to power. But we carve up like property lines for it. We come up with concepts like mine and yours and these different things, these distinctions. That's the nature of consciousness. That's what consciousness does. But ultimately, it's really all one. If you think of it kind of like an ocean, and on the surface there's activity, there's distinction, but underneath everything is all one. And so consciousness is this distinction, and it carves other arbitrary distinctions, but ultimately there is none, because there is no being, there is only becoming. Everything.
So in other words, it's not matter versus mind or natural versus.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that. I think we're misunderstanding one another. Yeah.
In other words, if you were to argue whatever begins to exist must have a cause, would be false, because nothing begins to exist. Everything is constantly becoming. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I've monopolized this way too long.
Kenji says that.
Rats, were you going to go, or did you want me to go?
Yeah, I was going to mention two things actually. Is that I'm not saying necessarily that the mind is a discrete thing. It's there is a sense in which we are cut off from or separated from the rest of the universe, because
no, neither am I. No.
Yeah, I don't have clairvoyant knowledge of what's going on in James' room or whatever, right? I'm not I'm just limited to my mind here and so forth. But I do accept that the mind could be spread out more and not one thing, like a single eye. It could be a set of things. Now that being said, I don't know if I could call it a process per se. It could be. I could grant that it would be a system, albeit not like a singular distinct I. It would be you could be your thoughts, but your thoughts would have to actually be a something.
Yeah, I would not say that it's a process.
You could argue. Yeah, and you could argue. Actually, you could argue from modal logic that it couldn't be a process or a property. It would have to be even if that thing is a system rather than a discrete I.
Yeah, I would agree. And Kripke was pointing this out: is that you can't really say that the mind is a process. It actually has to be a thing. And so he goes into this in naming a necessity. And Thomas Nagel would also agree when he talks about this in his book Mind and Cosmos.
Mind is a thing.
Before I forget, just as a fun aside, I was actually going to agree with earlier point James made about the will to power business, when he said, why are you arguing all these things on the internet, for example, if you have some desire to assert your will in a sense. And it's funny because I originally kind of my channel way back was kind of there's a politics channel, and it was sort of an eclectic channel, and it still kind of is an eclectic channel. But part of my motivation was, in a sense, political in getting the atheism-theism debate. But
right. Well, I think my point in bringing that up was not to, get people versed in Nietzschean philosophy, but my point in bringing that up is that I think it brings up a good point, is that there are always reasons, why we choose things. There is always a deterministic aspect to why our motivations, what motivates us, and why we are motivated to make whatever decision we make. And for Nietzsche, it was the will to power. It was whatever brought the most will to power. And actually, I think if each one of us were to analyze ourselves and our motives and pay attention to our decisions that we make every day, we would, I think, find that we are basing it on will to power considerations. I mean, all human relationships are based on symbiosis. They're based on will to power considerations.
Before the show started, James.
Yeah.
Before the show started, I remember I talked to you and I said I thought that I might be able to convince you of free will in a way that seemingly was compatible with determinism in a weird sort of way. And basically, what I was getting at is that this is where I was kind of waffling on libertarianism versus compatibilism.
Right.
I mean, it is libertarian in the sense that truly the sense that you can't predict it, and it could have been, from a external prediction sense, it could have been something else entirely. But what I was getting at is that I guess what you call the will to power in that case would be, and always would be, the prime mover in a sense. It would be the uncaused cause. So it would.
But it's not.
It may not be free in the one sense where it cannot be different than its own nature, but it would be free in another sense that it would not be contingent on anything outside of itself.
Right.
So it would be unfree in the sense that it's not free. It can't be not itself. In other words, but it could be, not contingent upon something outside of itself in a different kind of compatible sense.
Well, what I'm talking about is it's the will to assimilate everything and everyone to your telos. Okay, so that's what relationships are about. You wouldn't be in a relationship that went against your telos, against your goal. You would be in a relationship that would be conducive to that goal. And that's really all that means. A lot of people, when they think of will to power, they think of like some guy in a dark room, like some overlord or something, like something evil and dark or something. But it's actually just the fundamentals of the way humans and all life operates.
Right. It's whether you're a dictator or not. You have your goal basically, which is your will.
Every plant seeks to extend its roots and to dominate its environment, to subjugate its environment for its own telos, to grow.
Yeah. That's the trick though. Is the words dominate and subjugate were the notion of the overlord. The overlord mentality comes out.
Well, we usually use those in that sense, and those would be,
if you could find some other words, you could probably detach it from the notion of the overlord.
Go ahead. So going off what that we're saying, I mean, Rats, we're basically arguing that this is not a process, this is actually an object. And I mean, I think in using modal logic, we can actually show this. And this is what Kripke points out in Naming and Necessity.
Actually, I used one of those against Dorpatine. Should I?
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I mean, just to give you a starting point, I mean, Kripke says that, considering that there are necessary truths, water is H2O, we cannot metaphysically deny a possible world where water is not H2O. But if that's the case, then the mental and the physical should be the same way. But this is not necessarily the case. We can easily conceive of a solipsist world where there is only mental and not physical. And then
that was the argument I was going to use, actually.
Yeah.
Right, do you see that in my property dualism video?
Yeah, I mean, go into your argument then, yeah.
Okay, premise 1, if solipsism is conceivable, then the universe could exist such that only minds exist. Premise 2, solipsism is conceivable. Conclusion 1, thus the universe could exist with only the mind in it. Premise 3, universes cannot only consist of properties or processes, but it must also include things, but you can't have properties and processes with nothing processing or having properties. And then conclusion 2, thus the mind cannot be a property or process, but rather must be an entity.
And even Thomas Nagel, who's the atheist philosopher, would entirely agree with that. He says in his book, Mind and Cosmos, if the mental really is the physical in a sense and nothing else, then the physical by itself, once its physical properties are understood, should likewise be sufficient for example, the taste of sugar, the feeling of pain, mental properties, or whatever it is supposed to be identical with. But this doesn't seem to be. It seems conceivable for any physical, there should only be physical without any experience at all. Experience of taste seems to be something extra, contingently related to a brain state, something produced, rather constituted as an actual brain state. So it cannot be identical to the brain state in a way water is identical to H2O.
Can we possibly get back to free will?
Oh yeah, we went off on a fun tangent. Well, it's a 2-hour show, so I can see.
Yeah, I mean, my eyes just kind of glaze over on some of this stuff because it's one of those issues, and I hate to say it, where it's just kind of like fractal wrongness, where I don't know where to start. So maybe we should get back to the topic.
Well, basically what we were saying there is they were arguing that is the mind a process or is it a thing? And Rats and I were showing is it has to be a thing using modal logic.
I mean, I think it's neither, but that has nothing to do with it.
Okay, well, I mean, all right. But
I mean, this just comes from, I hate to say it, just sort of a misunderstanding of what a mental state could possibly be given the state of cognitive science and neuroscience.
Well, we know it could be possibly anything, but we're looking to see what...
The dirty...
Let me give a rule of... Oh, go ahead, Sam.
The dirty secret in cognitive science and neuroscience is that it's very hard, is that right now the methodologies that would be able, where we could point to a part of the brain and say, well, that's the experience. We can point to a neuropeptide and say, well, that's the chemical responsible. But the dirty secret is that either the methodology or the preceding science just hasn't gotten there yet to where we actually understand what a mental property is. And that's true of psychology as well.
I think a rule of thumb, and this would apply, regardless of what we find about the mind, and the brain in the future, or additional things you find in philosophy mind. I think like a general rule of thumb is everyone here can conceive of solipsism, even though it sounds absurd, right? You can't get past, by definition, you can never get past your own mentality, and so therefore, anything true of the mind in a possible solipsist world must also be true of the mind in the real world. Because the conscious experience in the solipsist world is identical with the conscious experience in the real world, therefore, by Leibniz's law, they're the same thing, and would have all the same
But this
properties.
is like a very, very specific model of what the mind is, and the problem is that we can argue about what the definition is and what it is, but the truth is none of us really know because it's hard to pin down what a mental process is.
Right. But what I'm saying is like this would be kind of like regardless of what we find about the mind in the future, like what we may find that the mind is X, Y, or Z, but like whatever it is that we're studying, it has this capacity that we can conceive of it in solipsistic terms.
And we can't really go on what we could find out in the future. For all we know, we could find out exact opposite things. We got to go on what we know now.
I hate when you say this. I hate how you arrive to this conclusion. You say it's conceivable, and I feel like if you actually entertain the idea of solipsism, it's absolutely inconceivable. I feel like if you entertain it long enough, it's an inconceivable idea. I feel like you can't reconcile perception without anything to experience. You're saying your experience generates your world around you. From what? From nothing? From...
You could take a lucid dream as an example.
In modal logic terms, you need to show that it's utterly logically impossible, that it cannot exist in any possible world.
I think you could make a strong argument that it could be conceived just because you can never, by definition, extend past your own mentality, and so therefore everything in your mentality could just be mentality.
Well, the difference, I mean, I just take an issue of that whole...
I can put it into a sentence that I can conceive of it. I can say it. I can say I can conceive of absolutely anything. But just because I can say it doesn't mean I actually can.
Right. Well, this is moral logic, though. This is not saying...
I deny the initial premise because I don't think anyone can conceive of it.
Well, I can conceive... Solipsism basically is just... Let me put it this way. Right now, I'm imagining you guys all having internal mental states, right?
Okay.
Well, you're talking with me, but the thing is, I don't actually know that, and I don't have access to any of that directly. My mind stops where yours begins, or and so forth. And likewise, I can't know if there's anything behind my sense perceptions. It stops at my sense perceptions. There may or may not be matter behind it, but the point is that everything in my thinking capacity is limited to my own mentality. It never goes beyond that to some material reality behind it, or beyond that to the contents of your minds. And so
it goes back to agnosticism.
But what I was getting at though is that all of our thoughts originate in our own mentality, and because of that, that would include all consistent thoughts. All consistent thoughts would be such that they could be conceived of solipsistically, because none of those thoughts can ever extend past the boundary of our minds.
And what we're saying is, we're not saying that it's necessary that solipsism is true. What we're saying is that it's possible. And if you could conceive of a possible world where you have only mental states, then it shows that necessarily mental states are not physical brain states. And using Leibniz law, this would show that they are technically not, using the...
See, but this, in my view, this is a complete mischaracterization, of what a mental state is.
Okay, so
it just is. I mean, and this is the reason why I brought up fractal wrongness, is if you start from the idea that, there's something magical and mystical about what the experience of sweetness is, when there actually isn't. That's actually a very good example of where there actually isn't. That is purely a result of genetic wiring.
Well, that's not what we're saying.
But the point, I'm using an example though. You have to see that the actual mental states are not actual mental states. They're just reasonable adaptations by our brains. Now, that's not across the board. We don't have evidence for that, but for quite a few of them, we do.
Wait, we know that there's correlations. We know that there's a series of correlations that you see a certain thing in the brain happening, and in philosophy.
Do I have to go over this for the third and fourth time?
Well, you mentioned that there are.
But when it's not merely a correlation. It also you have mechanistic explanations. In that sense, then everything that you have just said about quantum physics is a correlation.
Well, even the philosopher Stuart Goes would agree with you on that. Of course there's going to be mechanisms and correlations between the mental and the physical. I mean, if you punch me in the face, I'm going to feel a mental state of pain. I mean, of course there's going to have something like that.
Let me put it like this, Sam, right? So, obviously there is a connection between...
But that state has nothing to do with mentality, though.
Here's the question.
It has absolute. I mean, I am not a neurologist, but I can easily explain to you what's going on in your brain.
Let me put it like this: we could equally well do neuroscience in a materialist world versus an idealist world, right?
I suppose
you could have the brain being a kind of a projection, a program in God's mind, and then our mind being a subset of that.
You have no idea what neuroscience is.
What I'm getting at though is that, whether or not that's the case, neuroscience couldn't tell on its own merits whether it was conducting science under a materialist ontology or an idealist ontology. It would simply be stuck with its own empirical.
Well, I mean, you're talking about the general scope of science. What's the end game here? The general scope of science is that science doesn't tell you anything about, quote-unquote, the nature of existence in a metaphysical sense. That's not within the scope of science.
When you're studying consciousness, though, there is a sense in which you're asking not just a scientific question, but an ontological question as well.
Hey, guys, I'm out of here. Pleasure talking to you. Peace out, and yes, you guys have gone way off topic.
Yeah, I can tell. And also...
Well, the free will extends into all kinds of stuff, so...
Cheeky, do you have anything to say? Because you haven't said anything.
I should have really said the standard argument at the beginning, which is, if determinism is true, then sort of the libertarian conception of free will doesn't fly. And if indeterminism is true, it's not clear how anything is improved. And we've sort of touched on these things in a roundabout way, but, I should have probably said it like that when I started.
Go on.
Well, we've not really sort of talked about how a random action is therefore free, and that's what I'm interested in.
Well, Cheeky, can you stay for the after show? We can talk more about this.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I can wrap up and then I'll be done. I mean, just basically to address that. I mean, that's why Bratz and I went into philosophy of mind a little bit, because we arguing over processes versus actual and essence. And what we're saying is that in the indeterminacy, there was no indeterminacy going behind the action that is causing such things. What we're saying is the mind is... when we look into quantum physics, we're seeing indeterminacy as where a particle's position will be. And in the mind... When the mind observes it, it collapses it into a particular position. So, I mean, that's where the indeterminacy would actually come in. We're not actually saying, oh, there's this indeterminacy going around, therefore free will. We're saying the mind exists, we can show this via modal logic, and then therefore that is actually the first cause, the prime mover, according to Aristotle would say, which is therefore causing these actions. That's why we cannot predict where the particle will end up. It's indeterminate until an observer makes a measurement.
What I despise about modal logic, what I absolutely despise about it, is that the initial premise typically is always something that we don't know. And the only reason you're saying we couldn't know it is if we proved it to be an impossibility. So anytime anyone uses any sort of modal logic, they're admitting that they don't know. They're saying, I don't know whether or not the first premise could be true. You're saying, is it possible for there to be, a solipsistic universe? We don't know. We don't know if that's possible. That's the key. And based on that logic, we can never really know, because, like you said, it stops at our perception. So we can never know. We don't know.
I would agree. I would agree. I mean, what I'm saying, though, is we're going with what we do know and making the best possible conclusion based on the stuff that we do know.
I have an idea of what Realist is getting at here. Let me understand this right, Realist. So you're basically saying that, modal logic is using Leibniz's law, A equals B. If A equals B, then they're all the same in the same aspect. But you're saying we don't necessarily know everything about A, and so therefore A may not necessarily equal B.
Right.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I would say that in terms of consciousness, that wouldn't work, though, because by definition of what consciousness is, if there is something that we don't know about consciousness, then we are no longer conscious of it, and therefore it's not actually part of consciousness. So in the one case of consciousness...
That is the most profoundly silly thing I've ever heard in my life.
It makes sense. I mean, consciousness...
That is completely
Sam,
ridiculous.
Sam, have you been aware of any part of your consciousness that you're not aware of?
Isn't that the unconscious? Isn't that something that's unconscious?
Yeah, but my point
Dude, you just need to take some mushrooms and chill out for a day. That's all.
It's philosophy of mind. It's philosophy of mind, Sam. It's when you're talking about consciousness, you're referring to. I mean, I think everyone's on the same page here. I agree that consciousness is subjective experience, right? That's what we mean when we say something is conscious. We have consciousness. We have
to some degree, but go ahead.
So, if that's the case, you're always, by definition, aware of your subjective experience. If you weren't aware of it, it would not be subjective.
What about split brain experiments where you're not aware of something that you actually are experiencing?
Like corpus callosum?
Yes.
You have two minds then, right? I mean, there are two.
It's not two minds.
It's not two minds. It's you're not aware of something your
neurons are experiencing, but that's not your mind.
Right.
Not by your definition, because you think that that's all a correlation.
Yeah, I mean, your mind is, in that case, your mind isn't experiencing it, but your neurons are. So your neurons are what are.
So neurons have experience?
I mean, they're reacting in some way. I suppose that's what you mean by experience, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So in the sense that they are.
There's also state-associated memory where you can go back and put your brain into a state where you were in the same state that you were in, and then notice things about your experience that at the time you weren't necessarily experieking. Or you can experience a wider array of things based on other... I mean, there's a ton of psychological properties.
Like regression hypnosis.
Not even hypnosis.
And that's an example I'm getting at. Is that like it's a parallel is... It's not really part of your conscious, it's part of your subconscious. That's what you're
guys,
refocusing on.
Could we have final statements, because we're going into the last 5 minutes of the show?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll give my final statement, then I'll be done. I mean, basically, when it comes down to it, I This is why determinists constantly say in the book they have to show free will is an illusion. If you have to show it's an illusion, then I need to see some evidence that when I'm looking at my possible choices, I'm picking from one of them, and you have to show that I'm not actually doing that. It's actually an illusion. You have to show the causal connection from that and show that the other ones are just mental projections of what I think I could have done. But I don't see any actual real hard evidence that that can be actually the case. And I constantly hear determinists saying, that's all it is, that's all it is. But they're just speculating about it. I need to see causal connectionness as that has actually happened. In the atheist-theist debate, theists need to show evidence for God. I fully accept that. In the free will determinist debate, I need to see evidence that determinism is actually causing all of our actions. That when we think we're actually making free decisions, it's really not true. That there are not mental projections of what counterfactuals what we could have made. And I think that doesn't happen with you when you look at the Bell experiment, when you look at other information in quantum physics. When you see all of that, you really see some sort of superposition of different possible choices. And there was a recent experiment that came out. It came out in 2009, I believe, called Quantum Probability Explanation for Violation of Rational Decision Theory. And they show that there actually is this superposition of all these orders, and at any moment we get to select from them. So, I mean, I'm sorry I didn't get to go into that experiment, but but yeah, that's kind of what I would say.
Okay, Cheeky, you go next.
Well, I mean, I don't want to start responding now. Now we've finally got to the crux of the matter when, but when we say we're determinists, we're not necessarily saying that indeterminism is false. We're saying that indeterminism doesn't get you to a libertarian conception of free will. So, when we say determinism, what we really mean is sort of indeterminism or determinism, and we're sort of anti-libertarian, because I don't think the realistic nihilist or I have made up our minds about whether we're compatibilists or not.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's all about really.
All right, Rats, you go.
So basically what I was getting at, my final point, I think, is that if we don't have free will, then we don't really own our thoughts. It's something else causing our thoughts. But if we don't cause our thoughts, then we can't actually know anything. But we know that we can know something. Therefore, we have to own our thoughts, and therefore free will has to exist, basically.
Sam?
Well, I would say that you can't have a discussion of anything mental without a pretty decent knowledge of neuroscience and neuroanatomy. I would say that it's much more honest to say that we don't know in this matter, which is what I've always said, merely because there isn't evidence for either side that is particularly convincing at the moment. I would say that it's, for either side, you need to argue in good faith rather than in bad faith. And at times that can be difficult, as we saw in this discussion.
And realistic?
I feel like we spent the entire time, and I feel like it was tangential because of the fact that free will is so subject to our limited understanding. We don't know what we're talking about, and the idea is that the reason that we bring up the theory of mind and all these other things is because exactly what we're trying to talk about. No one has given me adequate understanding of what free will is, so we don't even know what we're talking about. So I think this whole conversation was just trying to get something started, and I think we all failed miserably because I still have no concrete idea what actually free will is.
I agree with realistic in that pretty much. I mean, is free will the choices that you make? Because I would say that your choices are are affected by outside factors. So in a sense, you are governed by your experiences, which are outside of you. But the illusion of these choices are caused by the frontal lobe, I guess you could say.
Well, we would say that they influence, but they don't ultimately make the choice.
No, but I mean, thinking that it's our final say, because some things are not that we cannot control. So there are things that we do not have a say in.
Well, sure, we don't control the amount of freedom we have in certain instances, but that doesn't mean to say that, therefore, these reasons or these prior things are actually causing. I mean, there's no causal connection.
Yeah. So this is the Lion Ghost Show. The after show will be in 10 minutes. Thank you for watching.